I was still holding the discharge papers when it happened. Maddie had just stepped inside her little body, still weak from the asthma attack that had landed us in the ER that morning. She clutched her stuffed bunny in one hand, her overnight bag, dragging behind her on the floor. Her inhaler peeked from the pocket of her jacket, and I was already calculating how many doses we had left, how soon I could afford a refill. We were barely inside when Colby started yelling. "Ass, pay rent or get out," he shouted from the kitchen, his voice echoing through the narrow hall like he owned the place. He stood near the fridge, arms crossed over his chest like a bouncer, and I could smell the sourness of beer on his breath even from halfway down the hall. "I just walked in the door," I said, my voice low. "We were at the hospital. Maddie had another attack." Colby rolled his eyes, waving one hand like I'd mentioned a flat tire or a missed dentist appointment. "That's not my problem. You've been freeloading here for 6 months, Arden. Either start pulling your weight or pack up." I wanted to scream, but Maddie was watching. Her eyes were wide and tired-rimmed red from coughing all night. She looked between us, silent, already knowing not to speak when adults' voices rose. I crouched beside her instead, brushing her curls behind her ear. "Go set Bunny on the bed, baby," I whispered. "I'll be there in a minute." Maddie hesitated, then nodded and disappeared down the hall toward the old guest room that used to be mine. Behind me, Mom hovered by the sink, clutching a dish towel in one hand, like it might save her from having to choose sides. "Maybe he's right," she muttered. "This was never meant to be permanent." I turned slowly. "She was in the emergency room this morning, Mom, and now she's fine," Colby barked. "You've had time to get a job, time to get out, but you're still here." I didn't even realize my father had come into the kitchen until his voice cut through the air. "That's enough," he said, not to Colby, but to me. "My name is Arden Whitlow. I'm 34 years old, divorced with a daughter I would burn the world for. I had a life, once a job in nonprofit marketing, a rented townhouse, Saturday pancake mornings. But one gambling husband and a draining custody battle later, I was standing in my childhood home trying to protect my kid from the people who were supposed to be our last refuge. "I'm doing everything I can," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm working freelance. I'm applying to real jobs. You think I like this?" Douglas Whitlow took a step forward. His eyes, the same pale gray as mine, were cold. "Don't raise your voice in this house. I'm not." The slap came without warning. His hand struck the side of my face with a sharp, echoing crack, and the world tilted sideways. My head jerked back and I stumbled, colliding with the edge of the counter. Pain exploded above my temple as the corner caught my skull. The discharge papers fluttered to the floor like white flags I never got the chance to wave. For a few seconds I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. I was on the linoleum knees, half bent, one hand flat against the floor, like I was trying to keep from falling further. I tasted blood in my mouth. Maddie screamed. I looked up through a haze and saw her standing at the end of the hallway. Her stuffed bunny had dropped to the carpet. Her mouth was open in a silent sob. Douglas didn't even flinch. He stood over me, towering, his chest rising and falling. "Maybe now you'll obey," he said. I don't remember standing, not exactly. Just the dull sound of my heartbeat, the cold creeping in from the tile, the sticky warmth on my face. But I got up, slow, careful, no tears. Not for them. Ruth moved forward with a washcloth. I stepped back. "Don't touch me." My daughter's hands were shaking. I reached for her first. I held her so close I could feel her heartbeat pounding through her pajamas. They didn't say a word after that. Not Ruth, not Colby, not Douglas, just stood there surrounded by grocery receipts, ceramic mugs, and 10 generations of judgment. I stared at them all. "He thought that slap would make me smaller," I whispered, as I picked up the discharge papers. But it just woke me up. Long before blood hit the kitchen floor, before Maddie's terrified eyes locked onto mine, as if I could shield her from everything. Even from her own grandfather, I had a life that looked nearly perfect on paper. We lived in a modest 2-story rental outside St. Louis on a quiet street, lined with sugar maples that flamed red in the fall. The The kind of neighborhood where kids biked in small packs and mail carriers still waved. I worked as a marketing coordinator for a nonprofit that focused on literacy programs, the kind of job that didn't pay much but felt like it mattered. My desk had a chipped ceramic mug full of highlighters, and my calendar was color-coded and hopeful. I liked helping people make their first library visits, getting funding for bookmobiles in underserved areas. It felt like building something solid. Jonah was charming when we met. Everyone said so. He had a grin that made you lean in even when you knew better. We met at a fundraiser. He made a crack about the lukewarm wine and paper-thin napkins, and I laughed before I meant to. He worked in property management, small stuff, nothing glamorous, he always said, but the money was decent and steady, or so I thought. He was quick with jokes and compliments, but slow with details. I should have seen it sooner, but I was too busy checking off imaginary boxes. Nice house, smart daughter, husband who came home on time. I told myself we were building a life even when I was the one doing most of the heavy lifting. The first red flag didn't come as a crisis, it came as a whisper. I found a bank statement one Saturday morning while searching for a screwdriver in the kitchen junk drawer. It listed a casino in Cape Girardeau I didn't recognize, and 2 ATM withdrawals that made my stomach twist. I asked Jonah about it casually, like I wasn't already afraid of the answer. He shrugged it off. Just a guy's night. I didn't lose much. I wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly, I let the conversation drop. That was my first real mistake. It escalated fast after that. More unexplained charges, missing paychecks. He started staying out later. I sold my car when he said we needed to consolidate debt. I walked Maddie to school every morning and took the bus to work. I packed our lunches in paper bags and smiled when Maddie asked why Daddy didn't eat with us anymore. Then came the day a collections notice arrived with my name on it for a credit line I hadn't opened. Jonah had used my information to apply for a store card. He forged my signature. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it, just said I needed it. We needed it. I filed for divorce 3 weeks later. It was messier than I'd prepared for. Jonah hired a lawyer through a friend, one of those slick types who made everything sound like a negotiation. We had barely any assets, but he fought me tooth and nail over every piece, down to who kept the toaster. I had primary custody of Maddie, but the court ordered joint legal, which meant every school form and doctor visit became a battleground. He delayed child support almost immediately. I'm in between jobs, he'd say, while posting pictures from some resort with drinks the color of sunsets. By the time the divorce was finalized, I had less than $400 in my account, no car, and a daughter who needed asthma medication that cost more than our grocery bill. The landlord gave us 30 days to vacate. I called my mother on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting on a park bench while Maddie chased pigeons with a paper cup. Ruth's voice was cool but polite. "Of course you can come stay with us, honey," she said. "Family helps family," but I could already hear it, that edge of something unspoken. Judgment, expectation, regret. Maybe all three. Moving back into my childhood home with a child of my own was something I never imagined. It was supposed to be temporary just until I got back on my feet. Just until I found a job with benefits. Just until I caught my breath. But time in that house didn't move the way it should have, and neither did Grace. Colby lived just 2 streets over in the same neighborhood where we'd both grown up, though you'd think he'd built the whole place himself by the way he talked about it. His truck, always a little too clean for a contractor, bore the logo of his company in bold red letters, Whitlow Renovations. And he never missed a chance to remind people that he was self-made. He said it like a punchline, but without the humor. Started with nothing he'd say, standing next to a brand new smoker he definitely hadn't paid off yet, and built this with my own 2 hands. Never mind that Dad gave him the seed money for his first client, and that Mom handled his books for free until he hired a secretary he later dated. Those details were conveniently absent from Colby's version of the American dream. He had a talent for reinvention. After his divorce, his first one, he spent a whole summer gutting the house, while his ex-wife fought for custody of their son. He lost that fight, but told everyone he gave up parental rights because a kid shouldn't be yanked back and forth like luggage. The truth was quieter and far less noble. He stopped showing up to court dates. Still by Thanksgiving, Mom had hung a photo of him and his dog over the fireplace, and Dad was introducing him to neighbors as our boy the entrepreneur. I, on the other hand, had always been the sensitive one, the helper. The girl who learned early not to raise her voice, not to cry too loudly, not to want too much. I was the one who sat with Dad after his gallbladder surgery, who cleaned out the attic with Mom when the heat was unbearable and the boxes were full of things she didn't want to remember. I was the one who remembered birthdays, who wrote the cards, who made the polite phone calls after funerals. Colby showed up with pizza and a story, and they adored him for it. I showed up with bills and apologies, and they sighed. When Maddie and I moved in, Colby didn't say much at first. He'd drop by to borrow tools or pick up a casserole Mom had made for him, give Maddie a high five, flash me a half smile, and be gone in 10 minutes. I thought maybe we'd turned a page. Maybe he'd changed. Maybe having his sister struggle in front of him would chip away whatever wall we'd built in childhood. But it didn't take long. The first jab came casual. We were in the driveway, Maddie drawing chalk animals on the concrete while Colby loaded lumber into his truck. So he set eyes on the board in his hands. You looking for work or just doing the artist in residence thing? Now I let it pass. I was tired. Maddie had been up all night coughing, and I didn't have the energy to explain freelance contracts or unstable Wi-Fi or the 20 job applications I'd already sent that week. Still interviewing, I said instead. He smirked like I'd confirmed a suspicion. After that, the comments got bolder. You know, utilities aren't free, right? He'd say at Sunday dinner, his voice light but sharp enough to slice. Bet it's nice not having to pay rent while figuring yourself out. Mom would glance at me then at the table. Dad would pretend not to hear. And I would chew slowly, silently, trying not to choke on everything I didn't say. One afternoon, I overheard him telling Dad in the garage, "Look, I get that she's family, but how long's this going to last? She's got a kid now. That's 2 extra mouths." This isn't a commune. I didn't confront him. I just went back inside and made grilled cheese for Maddie, trying to keep my hands from shaking on the skillet handle. He called himself self-made, but he'd never been self-contained. Every time he broke something, his marriage, his finances, someone's trust, someone else came along to sweep up the mess. Usually Mom, sometimes Dad, never me. I stopped playing that role a long time ago, but somehow I was still the one accused of taking up space, of asking for too much, of needing more than I deserved. The truth was simpler. Colby had always been the golden son, and I had always been the tarnished one, the girl who should have done better, married better, stayed quieter, the one whose pain was a problem to be fixed, not felt. Now that I was back under their roof, the old dynamic had returned like a bad smell in summer heat. And Colby, with his crisp polos and opinionated smirks, made sure I remembered exactly where I stood. Maddie started sleepwalking again 2 weeks after we moved in. I'd find her in the hallway, standing quietly in her polka dot pajamas, eyes half-lidded, clutching her stuffed rabbit by one ear. Sometimes she'd mutter things I couldn't quite understand, broken phrases about her old room, about where the door used to be. Once I found her trying to open the front door at 2 a.m, whispering something about getting back to her blue blanket, the one we'd left behind when we fled the townhouse. I started sleeping lighter after that, always, with 1 foot half out of the blanket ready to move. Her asthma flared too worse than it had in years. The doctor said it might be the dry heat in the house or the dogwood blooming out back, but I knew better. The wheezing always came after a family dinner where Colby made jokes about freeloaders, or after Ruth commented on the way Maddie chewed with her mouth slightly open. So unladylike, she'd say with a tight smile. She gets that from you. I didn't snap back. I was too tired. Most nights after Maddie finally drifted off, sometimes in my bed, sometimes half on top of me, I stayed up working freelance copy for a startup in Seattle I'd found through a friend of a friend. It barely paid minimum wage and came with no benefits, but it kept my name active in professional circles. Some nights I'd nod off at the keyboard wake to find 3 sentences typed and a sentence fragment stuck in the middle. The most important thing, a parent. I couldn't even remember what I'd meant to say. I knew the toll it was taking on me. The weight under my eyes, the dull ache in my lower back from sitting on a folding chair too long, the way my stomach dropped every time Colby's truck rumbled into the driveway unannounced. But I hadn't realized how much it was wearing on Maddie until the day I couldn't find her after school. It was a Wednesday. Ruth had picked her up while I finished a deadline, and I was supposed to meet them at the house. When I walked through the door, Ruth was folding laundry in the living room, humming along to an old Patsy Cline song like nothing in the world was wrong. "Where's Maddie?" I asked, scanning the room. Her backpack was on the floor, unzipped. She went to her room, Ruth said, barely looking up. Seemed moody again. I searched the bedroom, the bathroom, even the tiny garage, before I heard a soft rustling from my old closet. I opened the door, slowly heart-pounding, and there she was, curled into a tight ball between a stack of shoeboxes and a plastic bin of my childhood yearbooks. She had made a nest out of 2 old towels and was holding Bunny to her chest like armor. Her eyes were wide and dry, but her lip trembled when she saw me. "Sweetheart," I whispered, crouching down. "What are you doing in here? I was being quiet," she said. "Grandma said I asked too many questions." My throat tightened. I reached for her, and she melted into me without hesitation. She didn't cry, and that somehow made it worse. I carried her out of the closet and sat on the edge of the bed with her in my lap. She rested her head under my chin like she used to when she was 3. That night, as I lay next to her while she drifted into shallow sleep, I stared at the ceiling and felt the shift. It wasn't about me anymore. Not really. I could take the snide remarks, the cold stares, the secondhand shame. But Maddie, she was absorbing it all like a sponge. She was internalizing their disappointment, their quiet contempt. She was learning that her voice was too much, her needs inconvenient, her existence something to be managed. And I'd let her stay in it. I thought we could survive the awkwardness. I thought love, however imperfect, was better than isolation. But that night, with Maddie's fingers still curled in my shirt, I knew I was wrong. This wasn't just uncomfortable. It was corrosive. It was shrinking her. And for the first time since I moved back, I wasn't just angry. I was afraid. I'd been saving for Maddie's 8th birthday since February, $10 here, 15 there. Small freelance payments tucked into a separate envelope, a few Facebook Marketplace sales, a winter coat, returned for store credit. It wasn't going to be extravagant, just a little backyard party with a homemade banner cupcakes from the grocery store, a secondhand dress she'd pointed to at the thrift shop. It felt modest but personal. Ours. I told Mom the plan the week before, thinking she'd be glad to see I had it under control. Just a few of her classmates, I explained. A couple games pizza, maybe pin the tail on the unicorn. Ruth smiled tightly. "We'll see what we can do to make it nice." That should have been the first clue. We never meant the same thing in this house. The day of the party, I came back from the store with paper plates and orange soda to find the backyard transformed. A white tent had been set up over the lawn streamers in colors Maddie didn't even like hung from every post. A 6-foot table held a towering bakery cake, covered in pink roses with a scripted Happy Birthday Madison Rose across the top, as if anyone called her that. Next to it was a stack of wrapped gifts, each one bigger than the last. Colby stood beside the grill flipping burgers like it was his event. Ruth buzzed between guests, mostly extended family I hadn't seen in years, offering lemonade and commenting on how happy the children look. I stood there holding a bag of party favors and a half-deflated balloon completely erased. Maddie came outside in the thrift store dress, her hair freshly combed, the little birthday crown I'd made her in my hand. She stopped short at the scene. Her eyes scanned the yard wide with confusion before settling on me. I knelt beside her. "Hey, it's okay. Grandma added a few surprises," I said softly, adjusting the crown on her head. "We'll still do the games later." She nodded uncertain, then pasted on the kind of smile that children learn too early, one that asks permission to enjoy something. The party went on like I didn't exist. Ruth handed out slices of cake before we even sang. She passed out her own gifts, a brand new tablet, a glittery dress Maddie would never wear, And when Maddie thanked her, Ruth patted her head and said, "That's what grandmothers do. We show up when others can't." I stood beside the drinks table watching it all unfold like an outsider at my own child's celebration. I caught glimpses of Maddie scanning the yard looking for me every so often. Each time she did, I gave her a little thumbs up. She tried to smile back. Later, while cleaning up streamers, I overheard Ruth in the kitchen speaking just loud enough for someone like me to accidentally catch it. If she had any pride, she'd have left by now, but it's like she's settled in. No shame at all. Colby chuckled. Why would she leave? Free room, free food, free childcare. She's got a sweet deal. Their words landed like a punch I couldn't brace for. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white, then walked out of the room without a sound. That night, after the dishes were done, and Maddie was tucked in, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the unopened gift I'd meant to give her, a set of watercolor paints I'd ordered weeks ago, the kind with real bristle brushes and a travel case. I gave them to her quietly the next morning. She loved them, painted a picture of our house and a smiling sun. Said it was the kind of day that feels warm even when it's cloudy. I told her I'd hang it on the fridge. I didn't tell her I'd started sleeping with my wallet under my pillow, or that I'd begun hiding spare cash in my tampon box, or that I'd started keeping a digital folder titled Exit Plan on my desktop, password protected. I smiled back and told her, "You made the day brighter." But inside something dimmed, not just from what they'd said, but from the realization that this performance of love, this public theater of support, wasn't for Maddie at all. It was for them, to feel generous, to feel in control. And I knew then, without question, that the next party my daughter had would not be thrown in this house. Even if the next one took place in a parking lot with dollar store cupcakes, it would be ours, not theirs. The wheezing started just before dinner. Maddie had been curled up on the couch, watching a rerun of the Magic School Bus, her blanket tucked under her chin. I was sautéing onions in the kitchen, thinking about the invoice I needed to send by midnight, when I heard the first short, tight gasp. It was the sound that always made my heart jolt sharp and fragile, like someone trying to breathe through a straw. By the time we reached the ER, her inhaler wasn't cutting it. She clutched Bunny in one arm and my hand in the other eyes. Glassy. It wasn't our first late-night visit, but this one felt heavier, maybe because of the way the nurse tilted her head when I handed over our insurance info and said softly, "Still uninsured?" Or maybe it was the way Maddie looked at me when they fitted the mask over her face, trying so hard not to cry. We left the hospital past 9. She was better exhausted, but breathing steady. I let her fall asleep in the back seat, the emergency inhaler now zipped in the side pocket of my bag. I should have gone straight to a motel. Something told me, whispered it right in my ear. But I was running on fumes, gas money, and patience, so I pulled into the driveway. Colby's truck was already parked crooked and loud as always. The living room light glared through the front window. Maddie stirred when I opened the door and let her lean against me as we stepped inside. That's when I saw him. Colby was in the kitchen, standing over the counter, holding an empty cereal box. "You couldn't leave one goddamn bowl for someone else," he barked. "You eat here for free and can't even be decent enough to buy groceries." I blinked, still holding Maddie's overnight paperwork. "Colby, we just got back from the ER." He cut me off, voice rising. "I don't care where you were, rent's due in space, and food now, is that it?" He stepped closer, puffed up. "Pay rent or get out." Behind him, Ruth stood with crossed arms and a glass of wine. "He's right," she said calmly. "You've stayed long enough. This isn't your house." My pulse pounded in my ears. Maddie was pressed against my hip, small and shaking. I bent slightly and said, "Go to your room, baby. I'll be there in a minute." She didn't move at first, then did what kids always do, obeyed, even scared. Her footsteps disappeared down the hall. I looked up. Colby muttered, entitled as ever. I kept my voice even. "I've contributed. You just don't notice unless there's a check attached," he snorted. "You mean freeloading on your laptop while we keep the lights on?" I stepped past him to pick up the papers Maddie dropped on the table, ignoring his sneer. But then Douglas appeared from the hallway. He hadn't said a word all evening, hadn't been part of the shouting, just watching, soaking it in like he always did, until something inside him snapped. I didn't see his hand until I felt it. The slap came fast with that same heavy finality I remembered from childhood, a crack against my cheekbone that spun my vision. My head hit the edge of the counter, and my knees buckled. There was a ringing in my ears and a warm line of blood running down from where the countertop split the skin near my temple. Behind me, I heard Maddie's scream. Mom Douglas stood over me, not flinching. "Maybe now you'll obey," he said flatly. I looked up at him, not crying. My jaw ached, but I was clearer than I'd been in months. I stood, slowly wiped the blood with my sleeve. "We're leaving," I said. Ruth scoffed. "Don't be dramatic, Arden." I met her eyes. "This isn't drama. This is clarity." I moved to Maddie's room, pulling her little suitcase from under the bed. She was sitting on the rug, eyes huge and wet. I crouched beside her. "We're going somewhere else," I said, gently. "I promise you'll be okay." She nodded. No questions. She was too used to instability to even ask. I packed what I could in 15 minutes: her school bag, her meds, my laptop, 2 changes of clothes. I left behind the baby album Ruth used to show off at church, the family portraits on the staircase, the drawer full of old t-shirts I once thought I'd wear again. Blood still ran down the side of my face as I zipped up the bag. Colby muttered something from the kitchen. I didn't respond. Douglas had vanished again. Ruth leaned in the doorway, watching like a disappointed director whose star actress just ruined the final scene. "Where will you even go?" she asked. Not unkind, just inconvenienced. I looked down at Maddie, who was already holding my hand. Somewhere we don't need permission to breathe. We walked out without slamming the door. Some exits don't need theatrics. Just decision, just motion, just enough. And I'd finally had it. The road out of town was dark, and my gas tank was hovering just above a quarter. I didn't have a plan, no address in the GPS, just the thrum of the engine and Maddie's ragged breathing in the back seat. She hadn't said much since we left, just climbed into her booster, clutching Bunny like a lifeline. The silence hurt more than the slap, more than the sting in my temple or the crusted blood I hadn't had time to clean. I'd told her we were going somewhere safer, but the truth was I didn't know if such a place existed. Not yet. I pulled into a gas station off Route 6 and sat there under the harsh fluorescent lights, unsure if I had enough in my account to fill half the tank and still feed us. I checked my balance. $78. I bought a banana, a granola bar, and a small water for Maddie. I didn't get anything for myself. Back in the car, she peeled the banana quietly, then turned to me and whispered, "I didn't mean to ruin the tablecloth." My grip on the steering wheel tightened. What she blinked at me. At the party. I spilled juice. Grandma got really quiet. Then Colby said I was a little Arden. I didn't mean to mess it up. My throat burned. "Honey, no. None of that was your fault." She stared out the window. "I think they like people who don't take up space." She fell asleep 10 minutes later, murmuring something to Bunny that sounded like a prayer or a promise. I didn't wake her, just drove tears quietly falling down my face. At a red light near the county line, I opened my contacts. I hovered over one name before tapping it, Loretta James. She had been my boss years ago at a nonprofit in St. Louis, the kind of woman who knew how to run a boardroom and a bake sale with equal fire. When Jonah's gambling wrecked our finances, she'd helped me get legal aid. When the divorce became public, she'd defended me when the office gossip ran hot. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but something in me knew she'd answer. She picked up on the second ring. "Arden." I didn't know what to say, just that my voice cracked on the word "hi." She didn't ask anything, just said, "Tell me where you are." I told her. I didn't know just that we were heading north. "I have a cabin," she said. "Nothing fancy, just outside Farmington. Used to be my sister's place. Nobody's there now. You and Maddie can stay as long as you need. There's heat and a decent roof. You'll have space to think." The directions came quickly, practical and clear. I thanked her, voice thick with gratitude I couldn't put into words. Before pulling away again, I scrolled to Dad in my phone. I stared at it for a long moment, his number, the last message from 3 weeks ago, and tell Maddie to stop leaving crumbs everywhere, and then without fanfare, I hit delete, contact gone, no backup. Just gone. By the time we reached the cabin, the sky was already pale with morning light. It was small one-story with chipped siding and a crooked porch. But it was quiet. No shouting, no judgment, no eyes watching me fail. I carried Maddie in, still half asleep. The heater whined to life when I flipped the switch. There was no furniture beyond a fold-out cot and a dusty rug. I laid her down on the cot and pulled a coat over her, then sat on the rug back against the wall. The pounding in my head had gotten worse, each heartbeat pulsing against my bruised temple like a second betrayal. I touched the swelling and winced. It would bruise deep, I knew, but at least no one else would touch it. I leaned back, eyes open in the dim light, listening to Maddie's soft breathing. We had no food, no real plan, and maybe $70 to our name. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel watched, didn't feel crushed. We were cold, but free, and sometimes freedom is just surviving one more night. The cabin didn't have Wi-Fi, but it did have a kettle, a scratched-up coffee tin, and a sturdy lock on the door. On our third morning there, I woke up before Maddie and sat on the floor with the only mug I'd found in the cupboard, a chipped thing that read, "World's Okayest Hiker." The coffee was bitter cheap and burned the roof of my mouth. But it felt like a start, a bitter, hot beginning. Maddie was sleeping more peacefully now. No wheezing, no sleepwalking. When she stirred that morning, she blinked at the ceiling and whispered, "It doesn't smell like cleaning spray here." Later at the gas station down the road, I asked if they had a bulletin board. They did. I pinned a note, "Freelance copywriter, experienced fast turnaround," and scribbled my burner phone number. Then I bought another granola bar, this time for both of us, and used the store's payphone to call the shelter number Loretta had given me. A woman named Navia answered. Her voice was soft but clear. "Is this a safe time to talk?" she asked. It was. I told her what happened, some of it anyway. The slap, the bleeding, the years of slow dismissal before the explosion. She didn't interrupt, didn't sound shocked. When I stopped talking, she said, "We don't just deal with bruises. We deal with control too. And it sounds like you've had more than your share." She set me up with a virtual intake, helped us get into a temporary housing program, and told me about a new pilot offering scholarships for online tech boot camps aimed at displaced women. "You said you used to do nonprofit marketing," she asked. "Yes," I said, hesitating. "I used to want to pivot into UX design, but Ruth always said it was too unstable." "That's for 22-year-olds with rich boyfriends," she told me once. Navia paused. "Then you still want it?" I swallowed. "Yeah, I really do. Then let's get it started." She emailed me the application link. Loretta helped me fill it out that night. I hadn't opened my resume in over 2 years, and seeing my own experience laid out in bullet points felt like stepping into someone else's shoes. Someone who had ambition. Someone who mattered. Loretta offered to be a reference. "And not just because I know your work," she said, "because I know your character. That matters more than a LinkedIn badge." That night, I tucked Maddie in early. She'd started online therapy that afternoon with a woman named Jo, who wore bright earrings and made her laugh. It was the first time I'd seen Maddie grin in weeks. She'd drawn a picture afterward, a small brown cabin, a big moon, and 2 stick figures holding hands. I stayed up alone in the kitchen sorting through old emails. Colby had started sending me invoices, back charges, as he called them. Portion of utilities since October, $723.40. Back rent for shared meals, $310. Emotional strain to parents incalculable, but I'll round it to $500. I saved everyone. I created a folder, labeled it insurance if they come for us. I also printed out a screenshot of Douglas's last text, "Come back and we'll talk about custody properly." That one made my stomach twist. Then I opened a new tab and began coursework for the first unit of the UX boot camp. And just as I was beginning to understand the lesson on user-centered empathy, Loretta came in holding 2 steaming mugs. She didn't say anything at first, just passed me the better of the two cups. Then she asked, "Do you know how I met your mother?" I shook my head. "We were roommates our sophomore year. Both poli-sci majors. I was obsessed with Shirley Chisholm. She wanted to marry a surgeon." That sounded right. She used to call me too independent for my own good. Said I was going to scare men off and end up bitter and alone. I snorted into my mug. She still says that. Just about me now. Loretta leaned against the counter. She used to have fire Arden. Somewhere along the way, she decided comfort mattered more. And anyone who didn't choose comfort was a threat. I nodded slowly. It made sense in a sad way. "She's wrong, you know," Loretta added, "about being too independent. There's no such thing when you've got a daughter watching you stand back up." That night, after Maddie fell asleep again, I reopened the boot camp lessons and stared at the words, "build for resilience, not just ease." I didn't know if I'd ever be fluent in JavaScript or if I'd get a job fast enough to keep us afloat. But I knew this, I wasn't going back. Not to the slap, not to the silence, not to the shrinking. And resilience, real resilience starts small, with shelter, with bitter coffee, and with deciding you're worth saving. The envelope looked ordinary, no red stamps, no legal logos. Just my father's blocky handwriting on the front, the return address, still our old house. I almost tossed it into the junk pile, but something about the weight made me open it. Inside was a printed invoice, plain clinical, itemized statement to Arden Blake from Douglas Blake. There was no note, just that sterile breakdown, but tucked behind the invoice was a yellow post-it from Ruth. Neat, cursive. "If you want to be treated like an adult, you can start by paying like one." I didn't feel anger right away. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. It came out loud and bitter like the first hard exhale after holding in breath too long. The absurdity of it, the pettiness, the complete lack of awareness. I laughed until my chest hurt, and then I cried. Not just for the bill, but for every unspoken debt they'd made me carry. For every time I'd walked on eggshells to keep peace. For every whispered insult wrapped in a just trying to help. For every moment Maddie had hidden in closets or held her breath waiting to be welcomed. I don't know how long I sat on the floor like that, the invoice trembling in my hand. The air in the cabin felt tight. Not because of fear, but because of the weight of memory. Maddie came in from her therapy call with Joe holding her drawing of a treehouse. She froze when she saw my face. "Is that from Grandpa?" she asked softly, pointing to the letter. I nodded. She patted over, read it carefully like she was decoding a spell. Her little brow furrowed. "Do we owe them for loving us?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "No, baby, we don't." She looked back at the paper. "But it says we owe for food and water. Isn't that what families just do in healthy families?" "Yes," I said. "But not all families know how to love without keeping score." She was quiet. Then she reached into her backpack, pulled out her sticker book, and peeled off a sparkly silver heart. She pressed it right over the total amount on the invoice. There, she said, "Now it's worth nothing." I choked out a sound, half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into my lap. She smelled like fabric softener and sidewalk chalk, like every version of home I was trying to give her. Later that night, I scanned the invoice and added it to the digital folder, Evidence, Pattern of Control. Then I made a second folder labeled Proof I'm Done. The sticker-covered original went into that one. Loretta came by with soup and spotted the envelope on the counter. "They really did it," she murmured, flipping it open. "I half thought they wouldn't be that cruel." I shrugged. "I think they believe this is fairness. Control disguised as fairness," she corrected. "It's still just a leash." I stared at the mug in my hands. "I used to think if I tried hard enough, I'd earn their grace." "You did," she said, placing a hand over mine. "You just didn't realize they'd already decided not to give it." That night, after Maddie fell asleep, I wrote an email to my boot camp mentor. I asked about job placement support, I said I was ready to take on more hours, more projects, anything to build faster. Because now it wasn't just about escape. It was about earning so much peace they could never invoice it again. The email came in just after noon on a Wednesday while Maddie was building a Lego spaceship on the floor beside me. My laptop pinged and I clicked the subject line without hope. I'd been through enough interviews over the past 3 weeks to know that most "thank you for your time" messages were just polite rejections in disguise. But this one wasn't polite. It was a job offer. Position Junior UX Designer Company, Arcadia Softworks Portland Branch, salary $64,000 year. Start date April 3, benefits included. I stared at the screen so long, Maddie finally said, "Is it bad?" before I remembered how to breathe. "No," I said, voice shaking. "It's not bad at all." Then I laughed, really laughed. That same sharp sound that had come out when the invoice arrived, except this time it didn't hurt. This time it felt like cracking the surface of ice that had held too long. I hugged Maddie and spun her in a circle and she squealed like she was 5 again. It was the first time I'd seen her smile with her whole face in months. Later, I called Loretta and she screamed so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "You did it, Artie," she cried. "They don't know who they lost. I haven't even started yet. You showed up every day and built something out of nothing. That started enough." We talked about logistics, insurance taxes, childcare options, but under it all, I could hear the pride in her voice. The kind of pride I used to chase from people who never had it to give. There was only one problem. My first paycheck wouldn't arrive until the end of my first month. And the cabin, for all its kindness, wasn't a home built for longer stays. We needed something else, something that had walls without splinters, plumbing that didn't groan, and a zip code I wouldn't be ashamed to list on a school registration form. I mentioned that during lunch break the next day, almost offhandedly, to a woman in my cohort named Shannon. She was in her early 40s, sharp eyes behind cobalt blue glasses, and a nervous habit of tapping her thumb against her coffee mug. We'd shared a few Slack threads and laughed over a bug in our final group project, but nothing too personal. "Where are you staying now?" she asked. "Temporary cabin. It's rustic." She nodded like she understood too much. "Do you need help?" I hesitated. "I'll be okay once I get my first paycheck." "Which won't come for 4 weeks," she said gently. "That's a long time to live on granola bars and worry." I smiled tightly. It's just how it is. Shannon looked around the shared workspace, made sure no one was listening, then leaned in. My sister got out too. From a situation where control wore a family name, she had nothing but a duffel bag and a baby. "You know what saved her?" I raised an eyebrow. Someone who offered her an apartment before she could afford it. Someone who said, "Pay me when you can, not when they would have demanded it." I didn't answer right away. She continued, "I have a friend. Studio apartment, walking distance to Arcadia. It's old but safe. She's a former advocate. I already texted her. She said you and Maddie can move in this weekend if you want. No rent until your check clears. She's done this before." My throat tightened. That's generous. Shannon gave a small smile. "It's survival. We don't do this alone. Not anymore. We don't survive by pride. We survive by linking arms." I didn't cry. I wanted to, but instead I said the most adult thing I'd said in months. Yes. Yes to the apartment. Yes to help. Yes to a different future, one not shaped by fear or dictated by invoices. That night, I packed what little we had into 2 bins and a backpack. Maddie helped placing her sticker-covered invoice into the important papers folder without comment. We slept on the cabin floor one last time, and for the first time in a year, I didn't dream of escape. I dreamed of arrival. The apartment wasn't much. Beige walls, a chipped laminate counter carpet that had clearly seen more than one spilled juice box. But it was clean, the windows opened without a fight, and it was ours. For the first time in a long time, I unlocked a door and didn't wonder who might be waiting behind it. Shannon had been right. Her friend Denise was exactly the kind of person who made you believe in people again. She met us at the building in paint-splattered jeans and a sweatshirt that said, "Landlords Against Evictions," which I hadn't known was a real thing. She handed me the keys before I'd even signed the lease. "You can Venmo the deposit in chunks," she said, waving away my worry. I trust people who show up with their kids and ask good questions. I signed my name on the lease with a cheap ballpoint pen that skipped twice on the N in Arden. But there it was, bold and final, Arden L. Blake. No daughter of, no sister of, no emergency contact Douglas or Ruth Blake, just me. Maddie ran from room to room like it was a palace, squealing about where her bookshelf would go, how we could do pancakes every Saturday because we have a kitchen just for us now. She paused in the living room, really more of a corner off the hallway, and took out her markers. 15 minutes later, she taped up a drawing of a square with crooked windows and 2 stick figures holding hands. She wrote above it, "Our house, just us." That night, we lay on the floor with our feet propped against the wall, watching shadows dance from the headlights passing by. Maddie fell asleep mid-sentence. I stayed awake listening to the quiet, not tense, quiet, safe quiet. With my first paycheck, I didn't go big, I went practical. A secondhand sofa from a seller named Trevor on Craigslist who even helped carry it upstairs. A futon mattress for Maddie, a lamp from Goodwill. And one more thing, small, simple but necessary, a front door lock upgrade, deadbolt brushed nickel finish installed with my own 2 hands. When I clicked it into place, it didn't just feel like security. It felt like sovereignty. In my phone, I updated my address, changed my emergency contact to Loretta, removed every trace of the old house from my profile. I even deleted the voicemail greeting Maddie and I had recorded years ago at my parents' place. This was a fresh start. That weekend, Shannon dropped off a box of mugs and plates she said had divorced their cabinet. Denise stopped by with a welcome basket trail mix, coffee filters, and a note. "Never forget this is your space, not borrowed, not owed, yours." I cried again. But differently this time, not from grief or fear or exhaustion, from the strange, unsteady joy of standing on ground no one could pull out from under me. When Maddie asked if we could get a doormat with our name on it, I said yes. "What should it say?" she asked, eyes wide. I thought for a moment, then said, "Just one word, welcome." Because that's what this place was now. Not a borrowed corner, not a favor I'd have to pay for later, not a guilt trap wrapped in obligation. It was home. And it had my name on the lease, not theirs. It started with a voicemail. I let it go to spam at first, assuming it was another passive-aggressive jab disguised as concern. But when I saw the transcription start with "Your father feels awful," my thumb hovered over delete longer than usual. I played it through once, speaker low, while Maddie colored at the kitchen table. Ruth's voice was syrupy but taut like a tightrope trying to pretend it's silk. "Arden, I wanted to reach out. Your father's been quiet. He feels awful. Maybe you provoked him. He said it was just a moment and you were yelling too, but still. We're not proud of what happened. Still. There's always a still. Still your fault. Still on you to fix." I didn't respond. Not that night, not the next. I didn't owe them silence, but I didn't owe them access either. It was 2 days later when a text arrived from Ruth's phone. Just 6 words. "Can we see Maddie this weekend?" I stared at it for a long time. I knew what Maddie would say. She still had her soft spots for them, memory wrapped in the gauze of grandparent movie nights and ice cream runs. That's what abusers rely on, the glitter of old comforts to cover fresh bruises. But I also knew she was healing. Slowly. So I wrote back, "Yes. Public space only, 2 hours. I'll be present the entire time." The reply came back quickly. "Of course, thank you." We met at a park near the public library. Plenty of people around, no shadows to hide in. Maddie ran ahead to the swing set, and I followed slowly behind with a fold-up chair and a tight chest. They arrived together, Ruth in pressed slacks and a scarf she only wore when she wanted to look motherly. Douglas in a windbreaker zipped to his chin. They smiled like nothing had happened. Asked Maddie about school, gave her a book and a plush keychain. She was polite, guarded, said thank you but didn't hug them. Ruth made small talk with me, asking about the apartment, the new job, Maddie's therapy. I gave short, neutral answers. No cracks to crawl into. Douglas sat beside me for a minute while Ruth pushed Maddie gently on the swing. "I've never hit anyone before," he said, staring straight ahead. I didn't look at him. "But you hit me," I said. "That's who you are now." He swallowed. It was one time. Once is enough to define a person, especially when it's your daughter. "I was under pressure," he said, voice thinner now. "So was I. And I never hit anyone." He didn't answer, just sat with it. That was the closest to remorse I'd get. Not ownership, just discomfort. Maddie came over with a leaf crown she'd made. She offered it to Ruth, then changed her mind and put it on her own head. I caught the flicker of irritation on Ruth's face, masked in a second by a smile. When our time was up, I stood and said, "We'll head out now." Ruth nodded, hugging herself. "Maybe next time she can stay the night." "Not anytime soon," I said. They didn't argue, just watched us walk away. In the car, Maddie asked, "Was Grandpa crying?" "I don't think so," I said. "He looked like he wanted to," she said. "But not enough to say sorry." I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You don't have to accept an apology that's not really an apology." She nodded slowly, resting her chin on her plush keychain. "Then I won't." I reached over and squeezed her hand at the red light. Some people say closure means forgiving and moving on. But for me, it just meant knowing the difference between regret and responsibility and deciding not to live under either. The leaves had just started to shift amber, brushing the tops of trees like someone had taken a watercolor brush to the edge of summer. Maddie and I were sitting on the floor of our small apartment, surrounded by colored pencils and construction paper. She was making cards for her new classmates, a quiet habit she'd taken up since the school counselor encouraged friendship gestures. I was sipping lukewarm coffee and reviewing onboarding modules for work, the cheap Wi-Fi cutting out every few minutes. Still, it felt like peace. She glanced up between drawings, her fingers stained pink and green. "Mom," she asked softly, "are we still part of their family?" I looked up slowly, heart tugged by the sheer honesty of her tone. No anger, just curiosity and that little child instinct that wants to organize the world into clean lines. I set the mug down and scooted closer. "That's a really good question," I said, brushing her curls back behind her ear. "They're part of our past. That won't change, but we get to choose who's in our future." She blinked, thinking it over. "So like, people can be history, not forever," I smiled. "Exactly. Just like a chapter in a book, you can learn from it, but you don't have to keep rereading it." Maddie nodded like she understood more than her age should allow. She held up a card with a smiling jelly bean family on it and said, "I'm going to give this one to Rachel." Rachel was our neighbor in 3B, a single mom of twins who always carried an extra granola bar in her purse and had an instinct for sensing when another mother was treading water. She'd offered to watch Maddie for an hour the first time we met after seeing me carry groceries and a laptop bag up the stairs with one arm while Maddie clung to the other, wheezing from the humidity. That 1 hour turned into once a week, then twice. Now Rachel picked Maddie up from school on Mondays and Thursdays, even teaching her twins how to braid Maddie's hair so she wouldn't feel left out. It wasn't just help, it was kindness that didn't require payback. It was the first time in a long while I didn't feel like an imposition just for existing. A week after our park meeting with my parents, I joined a local tech collective for single mothers. Shannon had sent me the link saying these women helped me believe I wasn't a statistic, just a woman in motion. I went to the first meetup half expecting judgment. Instead, I found a room full of tired laughter laptop stickers and unshakable resolve. We shared more than technical tips. We shared backup plans, babysitter referrals, startup ideas, coffee discount codes. More importantly, we shared silence when someone couldn't quite speak yet, and hugs when the silence broke. Maddie noticed the shift before I did. She slept through the night for the first time in months. No more sleepwalking, no more muttered apologies in her dreams, just deep, even breathing in her tiny twin bed next to a glow-in-the-dark star chart and a drawing labeled, "Our House, Just Us." One morning, she woke up early and tiptoed to the kitchen where I was packing her lunch. "Mom," she said, "I didn't have any bad dreams last night." I paused, apple slices in hand. "That's wonderful, honey. Did something feel different?" She shrugged. "I think my heart is quieter now." My own heart cracked and melted at the same time. "Mine too," I whispered. We still had bills, I still budgeted every dollar. The apartment was still small, the job still demanding. But something had changed. The constant tension in my spine had softened. The impulse to explain or defend or apologize had dulled. And Maddie, my quiet little compass, was beginning to glow again. She laughed louder, walked taller, made more jokes. Trusted more. Later that night as I tucked her in, she asked, "Can we make our own kind of family? We already are," I said, brushing a kiss on her forehead. Outside the window, the trees rustled, a season turning steady and sure, and inside our tiny apartment, something stronger than history was taking root. Something we chose, something we built, together. The air smelled faintly of melted mozzarella and cheap paper plates, the kind with little blue flowers that curl at the edges after a few minutes under something warm. Maddie sat at the new table, a wobbly secondhand drop leaf Arden had rescued from a curb, and sanded herself, leaning over a math worksheet with a pink pencil in her hand and her tongue poking out the side of her mouth in focus. The room wasn't big, the furniture didn't match, but it was theirs. Entirely quietly, wholly theirs. Arden folded the pizza box closed and tossed it into the recycling bin with a thud. She moved back toward the table, pausing to admire the soft light catching in Maddie's hair, the way her daughter hummed to herself when she worked. The apartment still echoed in places empty corners, waiting for rugs a wall that begged for more than just a calendar and a single framed photo of the two of them at the lake. But even in its bareness, it felt like safety. "I like this house," Maddie said, suddenly still staring at her paper, the words floating out like she'd been thinking them for a while. "Nobody else here." Arden's throat tightened. She sat beside her daughter, her hands folded in her lap as if holding something too fragile to place on the table. She leaned down slightly, voice just above a whisper. "That's the point, baby." There had been no yelling in this home, no slammed doors, no footsteps storming down halls. Just the occasional knock from Rachel bringing by a tray of muffins or the muffled cartoons from the twins downstairs. Silence here wasn't tension, it was peace. Arden's phone buzzed beside the sink. She didn't rush to it, didn't feel the jolt of panic she once had every time her parents' number lit up the screen. When she finally picked it up, it was an email from her supervisor. Subject: opportunity. Let's talk tomorrow. She opened it with the cautious optimism she'd been practicing lately. A promotion track. Early talks, they said, but they were impressed with her onboarding project, her instincts, her leadership. There was even a mention of her calm under pressure, a phrase she almost laughed at. If they only knew the storm she'd come through to get here. She turned the phone over on the counter. Maddie was still working, counting on her fingers now, whispering the numbers under her breath. Arden let herself breathe in that moment fully. Not as someone running or hiding or healing, just living. They'd come a long way from that kitchen floor. From slaps and invoices disguised as lessons. From whispered insults posed as concern. They had nothing flashy, no grand gestures. But they had warmth, quiet, paper plates and soft math songs, and the gentle rhythm of a life built from scratch. Later, as Maddie fell asleep with her arm draped over a stuffed bunny and the hall light still glowing, Arden stood by the door and watched her daughter's chest rise and fall, steady and safe. She thought about the words her father used that night, the ones that had bruised more than his hand. "Maybe now you'll obey." But she hadn't obeyed. She'd walked. She'd bled and then stood. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't thrown punches back. She'd chosen something harder to build. And now, as the apartment filled with soft breathing and warm lamplight, Arden finally understood something she'd never been taught growing up. Love doesn't leave bruises. Not on skin, Not on voices. Not on memories. She closed Maddie's door gently behind her, then returned to the couch, picked up her laptop, and started replying to the promotion email. Her last glance toward the hallway held no fear, no hesitation. They hit me to remind me who was in charge, but I built a life where no one gets to raise a hand or their voice at us again.